Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we take complex research, cut right through all the noise, and just give you the fastest shortcut to being deeply and thoroughly informed.
And today we are really undertaking a critical, and I have to say, a highly technical deep dive into one of the, well, most volatile corners of the crypto market.
Yeah.
That's the Solana microcap meme coin ecosystem.
hmm
And our focus today is a comprehensive analytical report on a specific asset known as GROYPER, or $Draper.
Our mission here is very specific. We've got this full spectrum report that really looked under the hood of GROYPER. And for those of you tracking on chain, the contract address is AGSVYMJ LHVT2 and QF8XBJ1SVC66MS, the hedge pump. We're not here to talk about hype. We're not here to talk about, fleeting price action. We need to objectively figure out the viability of this asset.
Right. And to do that, you have to dissect its technical structure, you have to analyze its foundational flaws, and critically compare it against its peers in what is a very, very saturated market.
Yeah.
The goal is to provide that essential objective context, for anyone even considering exposure to these types of extremely volatile low-cap assets. And the report's executive summary, it really set the stage immediately. It flags several structural issues that, well, they demand immediate attention, and they're going to structure our whole discussion today.
Okay, let's hit those initial snapshots then, because they define the risk profile right from the get-go. The report confirms GROYPER is fundamentally a community-driven meme coin on Solana.
Ugh.
Okay, that's the baseline.
That's the baseline.
But the red flags, they start popping up when we look at leadership. The report explicitly states there is no CTO.
None.
It's defined as an entirely community-led project, which brings with it a very specific and, I'd say, severe set of management and development risks.
And that absence of any formal technical leadership is a fundamental weakness we're definitely going to explore later. But second, we have to emphasize its scale.
The size of it.
Yeah, it's categorized firmly as a microcap asset. And the definition here is key. Its market valuation isn't just unstable, it's highly variable. It's bouncing erratically between, say, $1.09 million and $2.5 million.
So every little market movement is just amplified.
Exactly, amplified. And liquidity risk is paramount.
And finally, the third critical finding from this summary. This is one that is just absolutely fundamental to the long-term prospects of any speculative digital asset. The report finds the project has no documented burn mechanism.
And for a meme coin, where the value is so often rooted entirely in scarcity and that community narrative, the lack of a deflationary feature is, it's a technical flaw of the highest magnitude.
Wow.
Exactly. So we're going to use this triad of structural problems, no leadership, the microcap volatility, and that fatal flaw in its tokenomics to structure our entire analysis. And we'll start with the factor that generates the most external pressure, the narrative itself.
All right, so if the technical components are the chassis, the narrative has to be the engine for a meme coin. The story is the utility.
It is.
And this project centers on the GROYPER internet meme, which, as the report details, has a, let's say, complex and controversial origin.
It does. The GROYPER image itself, it originated as a specific kind of stylized variant of the Pepe the Frog meme. It initially gained traction on image boards like 4chan around 2015.
Right. I remember that era.
So it represents an evolution within internet culture, but it's one that very quickly became deeply politicized.
And the analysis gets critical when we move past just the general meme origin and look at how the project itself presents its own identity. The report points directly to the project's official website, GROYPERarmy.com. This is where the risk really crystallizes, isn't it?
That's where the analytical rubber meets the road. The project's own documentation, it explicitly ties the token to the far-right political movement known as the GROYPER Army.
So it's not subtle.
Not at all. The stated goal on the site, and this is cited in the report, is to promote and protect the GROYPER name and what it means to the movement. This linkage is foundational to the token's identity.
Now, for us as impartial analysts, we have to focus strictly on the financial and regulatory implications of this, as detailed in the source material, not the politics of the movement itself. So what are the concrete analytical risk factors that the report identifies here?
The report identifies two major critical risk factors that come from this narrative. The first is significant brand risk, which, it directly imposes a hard ceiling on its growth potential.
It's a hard ceiling. Yeah.
In modern finance, and especially in the context of large centralized exchange listings, a CEX listing or trying to attract institutional capital, compliance departments operate with very strict guidelines. Any asset that's associated with explicit, controversial, or polarizing political movements is often just immediately rejected.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, a CEX, their entire business relies on regulatory approval and institutional trust. They just can't afford the reputational fallout of listing a token with this kind of baggage.
Precisely. If you're a venture capital firm, a big hedge fund, or a centralized exchange, this token automatically falls outside your investable universe. It's just too much reputational liability.
Right.
This is why the report identifies it as a critical finding. The narrative itself severely limits the potential for mainstream acceptance, and therefore, it limits broad market cap growth. It basically traps it in this microcap realm forever.
And the second, Rick, you mentioned regulatory exposure. That sounds perhaps even more systemic.
Oh, absolutely. Projects that are tied to explicit political or social movements, they just attract an order of magnitude more scrutiny than, I don't know, a generic dog-themed coin.
Sure.
So if the movement ever becomes subject to domestic or international financial monitoring, the associated digital asset, the GROYPER token, inherently risks becoming collateral damage. Yeah, the simple act of trading the asset could, potentially become subject to complex compliance or even sanctions hurdles down the road.
So what you're saying is we have a token whose foundational identity, its primary source of marketing and community, is also the largest single obstacle to its financial scaling and regulatory safety. That's a fundamental contradiction.
It's a self-imposed limitation. And when you look past that narrative, the second foundational flaw becomes just glaringly apparent.
Which is?
The utter lack of a utility proposition.
Right. The report is pretty stark here. It says the token functions purely as a trading vehicle with zero documented utility. In an ecosystem like Solana, which is so fiercely competitive and technologically advanced, how big of a deal is that?
It's fatal to longevity. We found absolutely no evidence of integration or use cases. There's no staking mechanism to reward long-term holding.
Nothing.
No, there's no integration into DeFi platforms for lending or borrowing. And critically, there are no governance rights associated with holding the token. This token offers nothing but speculative price movement.
The documentation, or I guess the lack of it, really tells the story here. The official website has no detailed roadmap.
No.
They aren't promising a V2 or a new staking pool or some game integration down the line. It's just the token.
In this absence of any strategic planning, it stands in stark contrast to the tokens that do manage to sustain value in this market cap range. The report highlights that purely speculative trading tokens, the ones that serve no function, they are consistently and vastly outperformed by their peers that demonstrate even basic utility integration.
Let's ground this with some examples. For a listener who defines utility only in terms of these massive software platforms, what does successful meme coin utility even look like at this tiny microcap level?
It's often very simple, but it's crucial for sustainability. Successful microcap tokens usually find a niche. It could be integrating into a specific DEX to let holders earn a small percentage of trading fees by providing liquidity. Or it could be integration into a niche Web3 gaming platform as an in-game currency. Or, as we saw with Bonk, it was integrated early as a way to tip people, a reward for community participation, or eventually it was even used as collateral in some Solana DeFi protocols.
So utility acts as a secondary source of demand not just for trading, but for use.
Exactly.
So without that, Gerald Porter is solely reliant on maintaining community morale and a continuous inflow of new speculative buyers.
Exactly. And when that community excitement dips, and it inevitably will, there is no technical or functional reason left to hold the asset. The foundation is just highly unstable. You've got high political risk in the narrative combined with zero functional utility. And this structural weakness leads us directly into the most damning part of the technical analysis.
The tokenomics.
The tokenomics.
Okay, so if the asset has no utility, then its entire value proposition has to rest on demand growth coupled with increasing scarcity. But the report flags a fundamental design flaw that just undermines the scarcity model entirely. This brings us to the no deflation finding.
This is the core technical hurdle. For any listener who deals with traditional finance, think of this in terms of equity. If a company issues 1 billion shares and never buys any back, the value per share relies entirely on the company's success, not on the share float shrinking.
Right.
In meme coins, scarcity often has to be engineered into the system.
And the report confirms that GROYPER lacks that engineering.
It does. The technical assessment explicitly states that GROYPER has no implemented burn mechanism, no automated deflationary features, and 0 transaction tax.
0.
0. The Soul Sniffer security scanner analysis was unequivocal. The contract applies, no custom fees applied. This isn't an oversight, it's a design choice that fundamentally changes the long-term risk equation.
Okay, walk us through the implication of this. The total supply is set at about 1 billion tokens, with nearly 100% already circulating. Why does the lack of a burn mechanism translate into what the report calls perpetual dilution pressure?
The math is simple, but it's profound. Since the supply never shrinks every single day, that approximately 1 billion token supply is still out there, ready to be sold by existing holders.
The supply is a constant headwind.
It is a constant headwind. Therefore, for the price to go up, demand has to increase at a faster rate than the natural selling pressure from existing holders who just want to take profits.
And that demand is rarely sustainable over long periods. It usually comes in these short bursts, right?
Correct. You have to continuously find new buyers willing to pay higher prices for the same exact pool of available tokens. This is the definition of a speculative bubble that relies solely on the greater fool theory. There's no automated systemic mechanism in the contract to reduce the available supply and generate that artificial scarcity.
So if we contrast this with successful deflationary models, what does that structural advantage actually provide? What does it look like?
Well, let's look at the more sophisticated models. Many successful assets, particularly those launched after 2021, they incorporated transaction taxes. For example, a 1% tax might be applied to every transaction, and half of that tax is immediately and permanently burned.
Okay.
Or projects might use a portion of their revenue or a set schedule to conduct token burns. I mean, even Ethereum's shift with EIP 5559, which is far more complex, it fundamentally introduced a burn mechanism for gas fees, effectively turning Ethereum into a potentially deflationary asset under high usage.
So in those models, scarcity is built right into the usage. Every time someone uses the token, the supply decreases just a little bit, which benefits every single remaining holder.
Yeah.
GROYPER offers none of that.
None. The tokenomics are entirely passive when it comes to supply. And this structurally weakens the long-term value proposition because holders know they're fighting a constant battle against a fixed supply rather than benefiting from a mathematically engineered reduction in circulating tokens.
Now, this brings us to a crucial point of confusion the report identified: the difference between token locking and token burning. The project announced a buyback plan that involved locking tokens until 2069. So why is the report so adamant that locking is not a substitute for burning? This is a key technical distinction we need to clarify.
This is probably the most important technical clarification in the whole report. Let's use a simple analogy. Imagine we have a total pool of 100 gold coins.
Okay, so the circulating supply is 100 gold coins.
Right. Burning is the act of melting down 5 of those coins and throwing the scrap metal into the deepest ocean trench, guaranteeing they will never be used again. The circulating supply is now permanently reduced to 95.
Gone forever.
Gone forever. Token locking, on the other hand, like these 10.5 million tokens locked until 2069, that's like putting 5 of those gold coins into a time-locked vault. Those coins are inaccessible now, which is good. It prevents specific people from dumping them immediately. It mitigates short-term rug pull risk from the initial team.
But the critical difference is that the vault has a key, even if that key is time-dated for 2069.
Exactly. When 2069 arrives, those 10.5 million tokens, which represent a substantial portion of the current microcap value, will potentially re-enter the market. The locked tokens still count toward the total supply, and the potential for future selling pressure is always there. It's a supply restriction mechanism for risk management, not a permanent scarcity mechanism. The report is crystal clear on this. Locking does not satisfy the structural requirement for deflation.
So what we have here is an asset with high external risk, zero utility, and a tokenomic structure that is basically built for instability because it actively rejects the scarcity mechanism that's required to sustain speculative price appreciation. It really feels like a house built on sand.
It does.
Which naturally brings us to the builders, or I guess in this case, the distinct lack of them.
And we circle right back to that first major finding from the summary, the not a CTO project status. In traditional finance, if you invest in a project, you look for the leadership, the CEO, the development team, the treasurer.
Of course.
In crypto, the technical leader, the CTO, is arguably the single most important component. They are responsible for the smart contract security and its functionality.
And the report is explicit. This project has no CTO and no identifiable professional team. It's entirely community-led, claiming full community ownership starting next year, July 2025. Now, while community governance sounds like the ideal of decentralization, what are the practical operational risks for an asset in this category?
The risks move from theoretical to intensely practical very, very quickly. First, you have a complete lack of accountability for development decisions. Decentralized decision-making is slow and it's often inefficient.
Right.
If the community decided tomorrow that they absolutely needed to introduce that burn mechanism we just discussed, who is technically competent and incentivized enough to write the code, pay for the third-party security audit, and then implement the contract upgrade?
The answer is probably nobody, because nobody has the designated responsibility or the funding to actually execute it.
Precisely. And this leads to a severe deficit in long-term planning. There's no centralized vision. Without a technical lead, the project becomes static. And on a rapidly evolving chain like Solana, smart contract maintenance is crucial.
So what happens if Solana introduces a major protocol update that requires some minor tweaks to the token contract?
A CTO-less project risks failing silently because there's no designated maintainer to handle it.
And this vulnerability, it links directly to the concept of abandonment risk, which is a very common fate in the microcap world.
It is. The report highlights this by placing GROYPER in the context of its likely origin, the Pump.Fun launch platform.
Oh.
Yeah, which is designed for rapid, anonymous token creation. And while it democratizes launches, the majority of assets launched there, I mean the overwhelming majority, fail to achieve any lasting market traction. They're launched on hype, they quickly saturate, and then they're abandoned when the initial creators or the major holders just move on to the next thing.
So a community-led project launched on a high failure rate platform without a dedicated technical team to maintain the contract or pivot when market conditions change. That is, by definition, an elevated abandonment risk profile.
It creates a situation where the token's future relies entirely on the continuous enthusiasm of unpaid volunteer community members.
And if the price stalls?
If the price stalls or drops significantly, the volunteers disperse and the project becomes effectively rudderless. It leaves holders with an asset that cannot be upgraded, cannot be secured, and cannot be developed.
It's not just about titles then. It's about institutional capacity. A CTO's job is to ensure technical integrity. Without one, the project lacks the capability to respond to crises, implement security patches, or execute any strategic change. It locks GROYPER into its current flawed state.
And if you look at the implications beyond development, attracting technical talent. No reputable developer or auditor wants to attach their name to a project without a clear governance structure, especially not one with high brand and regulatory risk.
So the vacuum prevents the very technical expertise required to fix the token's underlying flaws.
It's a vicious cycle.
Okay, now that we've established these severe technical and structural flaws, we have to look at how the token is actually performing in the real world. If the project lacks technical strength, the community engagement has to be just overwhelmingly powerful to compensate. But the data, it seems to tell a story of lag.
Yeah, let's drill down into the specific numbers that define GROYPER as a microcap project and why these metrics are not just small, but they're actively problematic for any potential investors.
Okay, start with distribution. What is the actual ownership base like? Who holds this?
The holder base is extremely limited. We're talking approximately 2,890 unique wallet addresses hold the token.
That's it.
That's it. For an asset that's aiming for viral, large-scale recognition in a market of millions of participants, 2,890 holders is a very small, highly concentrated base.
And that concentration, it implies a fundamental failure in the network effect, doesn't it? Meme coins rely on broad distribution, everyone owning a little bit. 2,890 addresses suggests a narrow, niche community, which just reinforces the earlier point about the controversial narrative limiting its reach.
It absolutely reinforces the idea of a hard growth ceiling. Next, we have to analyze the infrastructure. Liquidity sits at about $280,000.
Okay.
This is micro liquidity, and the report flags it as a massive risk for high slippage.
All right, let's explain slippage in practical terms for the listener. What does that shallow $280,000 liquidity pool actually mean when someone tries to buy or sell a decent amount?
It means the market depth is extremely shallow. If you, the listener, try to execute a moderately large trade, say a $20,000 sell order, that single order has to be absorbed by that tiny $280,000 liquidity pool.
That's a huge chunk of it.
It is. That $20,000 trade absorbs over 7% of the total liquidity. Because the liquidity is so thin, that trade will move the price of the token dramatically against you during the execution. You will get significantly fewer dollars back than you expected. You'll incur substantial slippage losses.
In other words, the market is so thin that the act of a single, not even a whale-sized investor selling can tank the price, making it incredibly difficult to enter or exit positions cleanly.
Precisely. And this lack of depth, it discourages larger retail investors, and it makes high-frequency or algorithmic trading nearly impossible, which further limits the stability of the price.
And then there's the volume. The report says it's highly inconsistent and volatile, ranging wildly from negligible amounts like $1,900 on low days to bursts of $331,000 on high activity days. What does that tell us about the nature of the trading?
This wide variance points directly to an illiquid market driven by coordinated promotional efforts. The report calls them Twitter X raids or Telegram promotions rather than sustained organic retail interest. Organic volume is generally more consistent. These sporadic spikes indicate moments where the small community coordinates a pump effort, which is completely unsustainable and leads to immediate volatility once the coordination stops.
That paints a picture of extreme fragility. Small ownership base, shallow liquidity that punishes large trades, and erratic volume driven by planned pumps. Let's look at how the community engagement actually stacks up against established benchmarks.
The comparison is stark. The report notes that GROYPER's engagement efforts are heavily reliant on these coordinated raids, which suggests the absence of professional marketing or any strategic influencer collaborations, which are crucial for scaling in this market.
Right.
And furthermore, GROYPER's core social media metrics followers on X, average daily mentions, Discord membership, they're consistently unknown or untracked in available data.
So is the very metric that proves viral momentum is untracked, how can we even assess its potential for growth?
We can't, which is a key failure point. Now, compare this to the established peer benchmarks on Solana. The report notes that tokens that achieve 10,000 or more social media participants are 3 to 5 times more likely to outperform the general market index. GROYPER is stuck below 3,000 holders. It hasn't crossed that viral threshold required for sustained growth.
To give that number some teeth, let's use the contrast with Bonk, a project that started small on the same chain but managed to cross that threshold.
Bonk is the perfect contrast. While it's substantially larger now, when it reached a comparable state of its life cycle, it maintained over 250,000 Twitter followers and an active community of over 150,000 Discord members.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It demonstrates the sheer network effect required to move from microcap instability to genuine market presence. GROYPER's 2,890 holders is a tiny fraction of the necessary base. It suggests the asset's growth is fundamentally constrained by its niche, polarizing narrative.
So the community size itself acts as a quantifiable indicator of the maximum potential capitalization. If the community is small and difficult to grow because of external factors, the market cap ceiling is low, and the volatility remains intensely high.
It all converges. The technical flaws discourage serious long-term technical talent. The brand risk discourages professional capital, and the lagging engagement metrics mean that the only fuel remaining is short-term, coordinated speculation within an incredibly illiquid market.
So we've covered the narrative, the lack of utility, the fatal tokenomic flaw, the absence of leadership, and the lagging market metrics. It's time to bring all of these disparate pieces together and synthesize the totality of the risks cited in this comprehensive analysis.
We can really condense the entire analysis into 4 core intertwined weaknesses that combine to make GROYPER an underperforming, profoundly high-risk asset, even for the volatile microcap category. These are the red flags every potential investor really needs to internalize.
Okay, let's list them explicitly and just review their implications one last time.
Red flag number 1, the absence of a CTO and a professional team. This creates high abandonment vulnerability and a complete lack of capacity for any long-term strategic development, security maintenance, or pivoting to adapt to market conditions. It's a slow, silent liability just waiting for the next technical market shift.
Red flag number 2, the tokenomic flaw no burn mechanism. This is the technical Achilles heel. The fixed, constant supply means the asset faces perpetual dilution pressure. It is structurally incapable of leveraging scarcity, forcing all price appreciation to rely on unsustainable new demand.
Red flag number 3, microliquidity and illiquidity risk. With only $280,000 in liquidity, the high slippage risk makes this market incredibly thin and unpredictable. Any moderate-sized trade can cause price crashes, trapping larger or long-term holders.
And finally, red flag number 4, explicit brand and regulatory risk. The controversial political association places that hard ceiling on mainstream growth, permanently excluding the asset from institutional compliance and CEX listings, thereby limiting the addressable market dramatically.
And when we view these 4 weaknesses in context, the report concludes that this token exhibits the classic characteristics of the majority of short-lived launches seen on platforms like Pump.fun. These tokens are often designed for quick, anonymous profit-taking by early entrants.
Right.
And without the proper structural foundations like deflationary mechanisms or substantial viral community mass, they are just statistically destined to fail.
To challenge that conclusion, just for a moment, isn't every meme coin, at some level, a gamble? Why is the report so certain that GROYPER underperforms its peers, given that its controversial narrative might appeal to a very specific, passionate niche?
That's a crucial distinction. While all meme coins are speculative, the successful ones, even those with niche communities, they mitigate structural risk. They usually either achieve massive, overwhelming community reach despite their flaws, which GROYPER has not, or they implement the core technical requirements, like the burn mechanism, to create mathematical tailwinds for themselves.
I see.
The report concludes that GROYPER structurally underperforms its $1 to $3 million market cap peers on every standard metric we use to assess longevity. It has poor community engagement relative to that viral threshold, zero utility, and fundamentally flawed tokenomics. That absence of deflation is a structural weight that few, if any, speculative assets can overcome in the long run.
Essentially, this analysis provides a definitive shortcut for any potential buyer, showing that this asset lacks the necessary ingredients, be they technical, communal, or structural, to sustain growth beyond short-term speculative rates. The report says, and I'm quoting, "The technical structure does not support the speculative vision."
That is a concise summary of the findings. The risks are not merely external, they are baked right into the contract and the governance model itself.
That brings us to the close of this comprehensive deep dive. We've gone way beyond the hype to analyze the critical technical, community, and narrative weaknesses of this specific microcap asset. Our goal was to provide you, the listener, with the tools to look past all the superficial excitement and really analyze the mechanics underneath.
We hope this exercise underscores just how crucial technical due diligence is in the Solana ecosystem. You have to look for the mechanics. Does the team exist? Is the token supply shrinking or is it constant? What is the actual market depth? These are the factors that determine longevity, not just the daily price movements.
And as always, we're going to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you integrate this analysis.
Given that the inherent value of pure meme coins is driven entirely by communal conviction and engineered scarcity, what are the long-term implications for any token whose core supply mechanism remains mathematically constant, never shrinking, and whose community is inherently limited by a polarizing, controversial narrative? And think about this. What criteria, beyond fleeting price spikes and social media activity, truly define a superior alternative in the meme coin space? Are those non-negotiable criteria always structural things like documented teams, implemented burn mechanisms, and genuine utility integration? Or can a strong enough narrative truly override fundamental technical weakness?
Essential questions for every learner navigating this complex market. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.